أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وبه نستعين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي يا رسول الله وعلى أهل بيتك المظلومين صلى الله عليك يا سيدي يا مولاي وابن مولاي يا أبا عبد الله يا رحمة الله الواسعة ويا باب نجاة الأمة يا غريب يا مظلوم يا عطشان كربلاء ما خاب من تمسك بكم والأمن من لجأ إليكم سادتي يا ليتنا كنا معكم فنفوز والله فوزا عظيما. قال الله العظيم في محكم كتابه الكريم وقوله الحق والأصدق القائلين أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا وهو العزيز الغفور. آمنا بالله صدق الله العلي العظيم. صلى الله عليه وسلم. Life, like we know, is all about transitions. We have not been created to forever be 7 years old or 8 years old or 30 years old. The idea is to consistently grow in the various stages of life as we experience it. And this growth and these changes that we go through during the course of our existence, though many a times they may be difficult and many a times we may see them as very challenging, at the end of the day, these small incremental steps that we take during the course of our lives are undoubtedly contributing to us attaining and reaching the highest state of human perfection that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala seeks from us. In a college classroom, or when we're in elementary school, when we're at work or when we're at home, we never want to be complacent in anything at all in terms of what it is that we're doing. We want to increase in our knowledge. We want to increase in terms of the number of our paycheck. We want to get through that college degree so we can go on to do the next degree. We want to pass 4th grade so we can get into 5th grade, so we can get into 6th grade, and so on and so forth. Again, because naturally the human being has this intrinsic link toward growth and to never being complacent to where they have been situated with. And similarly, when it comes to our existence here in this dunya, many a times we think about the various changes that we have to go through during the course of our lives. And when we're having a bad day, for instance, we might say, oh, I wish that I had the opportunity to return back 10 years prior to the day that I'm in today. But many a times during the course of our lives, we realize that at the end of the day, this growth and these experiences that I've had over the last half a decade, over the last decade, over the last half a century during the course of my life have all contributed to a sense of positive net growth in terms of my experience, in terms of my cultivation, and in terms of my ultimate aspiration toward reaching the state of human perfection. When I'm having a bad day, I might say, I really wish that I went back into the womb of my mother, because I was a lot more comfortable during the course of those days. Particularly when it comes toward the challenges and the trials and the tribulations that we have to encounter during the course of our lives. My friends, I say all of this because many a times when we talk about that most fundamental transition between this world and the next world, there oftentimes is a lot of stress and a lot of anxiety and a lot of discomfort in terms of our speaking about the concept of death or transitioning from this dunya to the akhirah. But at the end of the day, it doesn't have to be so negative in the way that we make it out to be. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created us for us to increase in age, to increase in knowledge, to increase in potential and capacity. Our bodies may be on a decline as we get older, but at the end of the day, the soul goes through no such limitations, as we touched upon briefly last night as well. The idea, in the words of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salatu wassalam, he states that a transition from this world into the next is a transition from darun ila dar, from one home to another, from one reality to another. The only thing that has changed is the atmosphere and the environment in which we are living. But that same soul, that I, that me, that you that we talked about last night, undoubtedly it consistently is growing and being cultivated as we make this transition from this world to the next. No one said that it's going to be easy. No one said that it's going to be smooth sailing, so to say. But at the end of the day, it's a necessary transition that we have to take, like all of the other necessary transitions that we take during the course of our lives. On that day when I was born into this world, it was difficult for me, which is why I was screaming, which is why I was crying. Before, I was in the warmth, I was in the comfort of the individual who loved me the most unconditionally. When I was in the womb of my mother, who loved me more than my mom? I was warm, I was content, I was comfortable. I didn't have to deal with people. I didn't have to stress out about all of the challenges that we have to stress out about in this dunya. I knew that when I needed to be fed, I would be fed. When I needed to be satiated, I would be satiated. When I needed someone to comfort me, I had someone to comfort me. When I enter into this dunya, again, the circumstances might change. In the beginning, it's difficult, it's challenging. You fast forward 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 70 years, 80 years, however old that any one of us are in this given room, how many of us would say that, oh, I really wish, again, generally speaking, that I would go back to the womb of my mother. Other than the fact that we don't want to disturb our mother's comfort, no one wants to go back to the womb of their mother. Other than on a very difficult day, generally speaking, the experiences, the ups and downs during the course of life, we're happy with the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this blessing of living in this dunya. When it comes toward transitioning between this world and the next, again, that transition itself might be difficult. In the early get-go, we might cry, we might scream, we might have to go through all of the hardship that we have to go through or that we went through during the course of this dunya. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, like we know, has not created us for this transient, corporeal existence. Rather, He's created us for an eternal life. In that famous hadith that is oft recited when the Messenger of God, alayhi salam, he tells this group of companions, he states, I wonder at those, for instance, who build their homes on a bridge. To which they say, O Messenger of God, and who builds their home on a bridge? And they say that this world is a bridge between your birth and the akhirah. And at the end of the day, we feel like we've settled in it for all of eternity. No. That doesn't mean, of course, that we can't benefit from the blessings of this dunya. In that famous narration that's attributed to Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, as well as Imam al-Hasan, peace and blessings be upon them. Allahumma salli. The Imam states, live for this life like you're going to live forever. But live for the next life like you're going to die tomorrow. But for whatever reason, again, my friends, our perception of the world beyond this one is so negative. We have this idea that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to take our lives in this dunya for the only and sole purpose that He punishes us in the world beyond this one. Our perception and our understanding of death does not come out of coincidence. It comes precisely out of our understanding of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. We believe God to be a wrathful God. We believe God to be a vengeful God. We believe God to be a Lord who has created us for one objective, and that is to punish us. And in reality, that's totally in opposition to how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala introduces Himself to us within the whole Quran, and undoubtedly how the Prophet and the Imams of Ahlul Bayt saw this Lord of ours. When we take a look at Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or when they take a look at Allah Azza wa Jal, they see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the lens of His mercy, through the lens of His compassion, through the lens of His love, through the lens of His beauty, like we talked about last night. But for whatever reason, our perception of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is darkness, is negativity, is anger, is wrath. Where does it come from? Once we read these du'as of Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam that have been taught to us by these most perfect of teachers and examples, including that of Ali Zayn al-Abidin in Sahifat al-Sajjadiyya, or in these beautiful words that he recites in Dua Abu Hamza al-Thamali, we have a deeper understanding of who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. In this line he states, Ilahi, تَتَحَبَّبُ إِلَيْنَا بِالنِّعَمِ وَنُؤَارِضُكَ بِالذُّنُوبِ. We state, O Allah, that you are the one who draw close to us out of your love by showering blessing upon us. Every day that we wake up in the morning, every time we have the opportunity to utter anything via our tongue or see with these eyes, the blessings that we are consistently surrounded with, the health and the wealth and the family and the community and the air condition when it's hot and the heat when it's cold and the food on our table, all of these, like we know, are blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that more often than not we take for granted. Over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or Imam Zayn al-Abidin says about God, he says, تَتَحَبَّبُ إِلَيْنَا بِالنِّعَمِ, that it is out of your love that you shower blessing after blessing after blessing upon us. وَنُؤَارِضُكَ بِالذُّنُوبِ. But the way that we thank you for all of these blessings is by sinning and by transgressing. With every gift that you have given us, the gift of the eye, the gift of the feet, the gift of the tongue, the gift of food, the gift of drink, with our eyes we disobey you. With the food in front of us we waste. With the families that we have, we abuse. With blessing after blessing that you give us, we consistently return it back to you with our sins. تَتَحَبَّبُ إِلَيْنَا بِالنِّعَمِ وَنُؤَارِضُكَ بِالذُّنُوبِ. And then he continues, خَيْرُكَ إِلَيْنَا نَازِلٌ. But that doesn't stop you. That doesn't stop you from allowing for more goodness and more blessing to come down and descend from the skies. Imagine, to put it in perspective, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He holds us to account in the same way that we hold people to account. Someone does something wrong in our workplace, they get dismissed. Someone does something wrong in our family circle, we immediately hold them accountable for what it is that they did. Our friend wrongs us, says something to us, whatever it might be, we don't talk to them for decades upon decades. Imagine Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He holds us to account in the same way that we hold others to account. In other words, that if, for instance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, you looked at something forbidden, no longer do you have eyesight. Well, what would we do? You waste food one day, tomorrow no food. Imagine. Imam Zayn al-Abidin says, no matter how many times we disobey, no matter how many times we transgress your bounds, O Allah, خَيْرُكَ إِلَيْنَا نَازِلٌ وَشَرُّكَ إِلَيْكَ سَائِدٌ. That no matter how many times we disobey, you still allow for your blessings to descend. And the way that we repay you is by having more evil deeds ascend back to the heavens. Transgression after transgression, fault after fault, sin after sin. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of His love and out of His care and out of His mercy and out of His grace and out of His beauty and out of His patience for each and every single one of us, still gives us the opportunity to turn back to Him. If this is the Lord of this dunya, and we know according to our ahadith that the traditions tell us that the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has 100 parts to it, or according to another hadith, 70 parts to it, and 99 or 69 of these parts are reserved for the world beyond this one, and only one of them reflects in this dunya, why do we fear death? Why is our perspective of the world beyond this one so negative? I'm not saying that it's not going to be without obstacles or difficulties or challenges. But so many times our perception when it comes toward the world beyond this one is so negative, and it stems from a failure toward understanding who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. And so for today's discussion, or this evening's discussion, insha'Allah ta'ala, I want to reflect upon how we can seek toward transitioning from this world to the next world through the lens of mercy and of compassion and of love. And I want to reflect upon how we can change our perception of death in three different dimensions. The first dimension is in terms of us understanding why exactly we need to talk about death in the first place. The second question in terms of us understanding why it is that we fear death. And the third in terms of steps that we can take to allow for ourselves to be successful in this transition from dunya to akhirah. So let's jump right into dimension number one of the discussion. Someone says, okay, death. Why should we talk about death? Right now, we're living in this dunya. Let's talk about life. Well, in reality, talking about death is talking about life. It is undoubtedly, intrinsically linked to every single human being that we will transition from this dunya to the akhirah. And again, like I said, my friends, there's fundamentally nothing wrong with having this conversation. And we have this conversation for multiple different reasons. The most obvious of them is when you know what it is that you want to commit to during the course of your life, you have the opportunity to get there far more successfully than if someone has no idea where it is that they're going. Look, I work with young people, college students, every single day in my work. When I have a student who comes to me at age 18 or 19 in their undergrad career, and they sit in my office and they say, listen, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a lawyer, I want to be a teacher, I want to work in my family business, I want to do whatever it is that I want to do. And they have that goal, and they have that objective. And though it changes many a times, and though situations during the course of one's life allow for various transitions to take place, when someone has a set goal of what it is that they're working toward, they're far more successful than when someone says, I have no idea what I'm doing right now. Think about it. Imagine you get into your car and you want to go for a drive. Fundamentally, going for a drive, nothing wrong with it. For some people, it's therapeutic, it's helpful. They just like to go for a drive. You get into your car, someone asks you, hey, where are you going? If you tell them, I'm going to the masjid, I'm going to go grab a cup of coffee, I'm going to go get a Philly cheesesteak, I'm going to go and do whatever it is that I'm going to do, great. If someone says, I'm going to go for a drive, but I have no idea where I'm going, nor when it is that I'm going to come back, there's a good chance that that person is not going to accomplish even the mental health sort of support that they're trying to attain via that drive, because they don't know where they're going, they don't know where they're coming, there's no objective at the end of that particular trip. When we know, every single one of us, that we are going to transition from this world to the next, and we are going to enter into a grave 6 feet under this ground, and there are going to be those around us from within our communities who are going to wash our bodies, and who are going to shroud us, and who are going to lower us, and who are going to pray over us. All of a sudden, our experience and our understanding of what it is that we're seeking toward doing during the course of this dunya, there's a lot more perspective. Everything between today and that day. That's not a bad thing. It just helps put everything in perspective. Let's take a look at the example of Amir al-Mu'mineen and the example of Muawiyah. When you take a look at Amir al-Mu'mineen, salamullah alayh, we know that the Imam alayhi salam would famously state in this very lengthy narration, I believe it's mentioned within Nahj al-Balagha, about how he would not even oppress an ant that has wheat or barley in its mouth. Why? Because he has an understanding that if he oppresses an insect that roams this earth, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold him accountable for it. On the flip side, you see Muawiyah. Ali knows where he's going. Ali ibn Abi Talib, he sees life with a much deeper perspective. Why? Because he recognizes that there undoubtedly is a purpose and an ultimate objective during the course of his dunya in comparison with someone like Muawiyah, right? Who has no vision, nor any understanding. The only thing that Muawiyah sees is this world. So he's not concerned about oppression. He's not concerned about how he treats people. The only thing that he's thinking about is accumulation after accumulation after accumulation. And his perspective on life is totally different than that of Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam. So we go back to the question, why don't we talk about life? Why do we have to talk about death? My friends, talking about death is talking about life. It totally transitions our perspective in terms of how we see every single thing that we do during the course of this dunya. When we work, when we spend time with our family, when we come to the mosque, when we're in the course of our prayers, when we're fasting during the holy month of Ramadan, when we're deciding how much to spend and where to spend and so on and so forth, everything gets put into perspective when we realize what it is that we're working toward. This is example or reason number one why we talk about death as opposed to. The second reason is that generally speaking, my friends, when we have a conversation about death, we know that this transition between dunya and akhirah has various different stages to it. We have the moment of death, we have the barzakh, we have the day of judgment, and inshallah we have paradise in the company of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. For the believer, having a conversation about what they're working toward is an incentive. When I talk to this college student who's 18, 19 years old, and they have this desire to get to where it is that they want to be, they look forward to that day. They see the big picture during the course of life. They might not enjoy taking a class on Islamic law, or they might not enjoy taking a course in art, or in whatever it is that they're studying, totally different than their ultimate degree. But they know that it's a small stepping stone for one major transaction, and that is going to be that day when they graduate from the university, and when they hold on to their diploma, and then they commit to their graduate degree. They see all of these small steps as an opportunity to get to their ultimate goal, which is to land that career, that job, whatever it is that they want in this dunya. They have an aspiration. And so having a conversation about all of the transitions is an incentive for them. They look forward to that moment. Think about it. If our ultimate goal is to be in the company of the greatest of God's creations in the world beyond this one, I would love to talk about the world beyond this one. I would love to have this conversation. When it comes toward the example of Amir al-Mu'mineen again and of Ahlul Bayt, only because Amir al-Mu'mineen gives us example after example of how he would speak about death, he would state to a group of his companions, هَلْ رَأَيْتَ حَبِيبًا يُكْرَهُ لِقَاءَ حَبِيبًا. He states, have you ever seen someone who's in love not be excited to see his beloved? He said, that's how I see death. Because it's a transition between this dunya and allowing for me to see the one whom I love. And that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Asbagh bin Nubata, in the last days of the life of Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. We recite this in the Masaib of the 20th of Ramadan, often culturally within our communities. Imam al-Hassan, he tells all of the companions to leave. And he says, only allow for the children of Ali at this moment to grieve next to their father. As Zainab and Kulthum and Al-Hassan, Al-Hussein, Abul Fadl al-Abbas, al-Baneen, they're all around Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, they hear some loud crying from outside. Imam Al-Hassan, he exits from the house and he sees this companion, Asbagh bin Nubata, sitting outside of the porch of the house of Ali. He states, oh Asbagh, it's time for you to go home. Your loud grieving is bothering the women and the children of my father Ali. He says, oh, son of Rasulullah, let me get one more glance at the face of Ali. He comes in. Everyone leaves. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says, Ya Asbagh, la tabki, innaha wallahi jannah. He says, what are you crying for? I see paradise in front of me. I'm good. Don't be concerned. At this moment, Asbagh bin Nubata, he responds with this really beautiful and epic line. He says, oh Amir al-Mu'mineen, I'm not crying for you. I know you're going to paradise. I'm crying for me. What is life like without Ali ibn Abi Talib? For Ali alayhi salam, that transition is something that he looks forward to. When Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is in his final moments, He's reciting dua after dua, dhikr after dhikr, praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He recites in one of his final munajat, Ilahi hada hasanul bala. This tribulation that you're putting me through is a beautiful tribulation. Why? Because I know that everything that I'm exerting myself in terms of it doing is allowing for my rank to increase in the world beyond this one. They saw every tribulation of this dunya as an incentive and as an investment in the world beyond this one. So why talk about death? For two reasons. Number one, it helps us prepare to get to where it is that we want to be. And number two, for us, the believer, we shouldn't shy away from it because it offers us an incentive and it reminds us of that which we are working toward. And when we are the followers of these personalities, we look forward to that moment where we transition from this dunya to the akhirah. Sallu ala Muhammad wa And that brings me then toward the second dimension of the discussion. Why is it then that even then the believer oftentimes fears death? It's simple. Undoubtedly, my friends, perhaps we fear death because we fear transitions. We fear changes during the course of life. We fear marriage. We fear having children. We fear moving homes. We fear changing jobs. It's normal and it's natural, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it fundamentally. But the idea is to work toward this growth in terms of capacity for us to be amongst those who are the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where everything has been clear and we put the entirety of our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Transitions are hard. We know that in our lives. But having that sense of strength and commitment and determination, realizing and recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who supported us in our transition from the womb of our mothers into this dunya, and who cared for us and who nurtured us in those early months of our lives when our bodies were so fragile, and who transitioned and who growed and who cultivated us and who cared for us from when we were 1 to when we were 2, from when we were 2 to when we were 3. When we didn't have any knowledge, when we didn't have any education, when we didn't have a job, when we didn't have family, when we didn't have children, we didn't have community, we didn't have people who respected us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cared for us through all of those years and through all of those decades. And He nurtured us, and He grew us, and He cultivated us, and He loved us day after day. And we wronged, and He forgave us. And we committed sin, and He raised us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will all of a sudden not close the door and leave us in the world beyond this one. It's not the case. The same God who is merciful in the dunya is undoubtedly merciful in the akhirah. He is Arhamur Rahimeen, the most merciful of those who show mercy. And so one reason perhaps why we fear death is because, again, it's this natural transition that we take. A second reason why many people might fear death is because they fear their own sins, and they fear their own transgressions, and they fear their own wrongdoings. Ilahi, in the words of Ali Zayn al-Abidin, alayhi salam, mali la abki, abki li khuruj nafsi, abki li dhulmati qabri, abki li su'al munkarin wa nakirin iyai. Oh Allah, why should I not cry? I cry because of thinking of that moment when my soul leaves my body. I cry thinking about that moment when my body is lowered into the grave. I cry when the community members around me, they hold upon my coffin and they take me to the room where they perform ghusl. I cry when I'm lowered into that grave. I cry thinking about the angels of Munkar and Nakir coming toward me. These are fearful moments. But at the same time, we have this opportunity in this dunya to seek repentance and to seek forgiveness. And through that forgiveness and through that repentance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us the strength and gives us the confidence to realize that this transition between dunya and akhirah is going to undoubtedly be okay. Because again, we've put forth our effort and we've dedicated ourselves to Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. So with His grace and with His mercy, He will make this transition easy for each and every one of us. And the idea, like I said before, is to grow in terms of our capacity, such that no longer we fear death. Let me give you this example and this famous anecdote which we narrate during these days of Muharram. And this is the anecdote of Qasim ibn al-Hasan ibn Ali ibn Abi Talib. This young boy, 11 years old, 13 years old, 14 years old, Allahu A'lam, doesn't matter. When we recite the maqtal of Qasim, the son of al-Hasan alayhi salam, we state that when he went out, he fought valiantly, he killed X amount of people. When Qasim ibn al-Hasan lowered himself to the ground because he realizes that his slipper was broken. Don't we recite this in the Masa'ib? And when he goes to see that his slipper was broken, a man from the army of Umar ibn Sa'd calls out, strike this man now, strike this boy now. Let me ask you a question. Qasim is a young boy. He's not in a playground. He's not on a basketball court. If someone is playing a sport and they have their shoelaces untied, sometimes they're so in the zone and they're so focused that someone else has to tell them that, hey, your shoelaces are untied, be careful so you don't trip. You know what I'm saying? How many of you have experienced this? We've all experienced this during the course of our life. Qasim is not playing a sport. He has spears, and he has swords, and he has arrows, and he has rocks, and he has 30,000 grown men ready to shed his sacred blood. Yet his attention was more on his slipper than everything around him. Why? Why? Was it that Qasim was just naive? No. My friends, Qasim ibn al-Hasan wasn't concerned about death. When he says to his uncle Abi Abdullah al-Hussein the night before, al-mawtu feek, ya ahla min al-asal, that in your way death, oh my uncle, is sweeter than honey. He meant literally that this world is not important to me. So my slipper at this moment is more significant than each and every single one of you. Which is why when Qasim lowers himself and that blow takes his head, we see that Qasim transitions from dunya to akhirah because he was already living in akhirah in those final moments. When Abi Abdullah al-Hussein was fighting, after everyone else had been killed on the day of Ashura, one of the members, as recited or as narrated in the Maqtal, from the army of Umar bin Sa'd, calls out, "Unduru ilayhi la yubali bil maut." Look at this man, death doesn't faze him. Hussein, death doesn't faze you. Why? Because Hussein alayhi salam only saw Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the course of those moments. So he wasn't concerned, he wasn't fearful, he wasn't afraid, no matter how many people were around him, nor did he ever complain to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that, oh Allah, my life is too short, I'm too young, so on and so forth. No, it never bothered him because he knew that this was a necessity for him to transition from this world to the beloved in the world beyond this one. We take inspiration from these anecdotes, but it requires us, my friends, to commit ourselves toward a certain rank and toward a certain situation in this dunya, such that that transition is exactly like theirs. Peace and blessings be upon them. And that brings me then to the third dimension of the discussion. Theoretically, we can take example and inspiration from Al-Qasim. We can take inspiration from Al-Hussein. We can take inspiration from the Prophet and his family. But how is it that we get there? The last moments of the life of a believer or a non-believer, of any human being, are what are known as the moments of adila. Many of you are familiar with this term. This famous dua that is often recited, dua adila, which we recite, or we are told to often recite, or that's often recited near someone who's in their final moments in transitioning from the dunya to the akhirah, when they're in the moments of al-ihtidar. In the Arabic language, the word adila means to transition. And we hear many a times within our hadith literature, and I'm sure that many of you have heard in various majalis or in Sunday school or whatever it might be, that the last moments of the life of any individual are the most difficult and the most trying and the most challenging. Why? Because in those moments, there are various different groups of people who are surrounding you. The last moments of someone's life are known as al-ihtidar, which comes from the root word of hudur, which means presence. Some say that the reason why the last moments of the life of an individual are known as al-ihtidar, presence, is because that's the moment when the soul is most present. While others state it's because there are numerous different factions who are present around the believer in their last moments. For instance, in the last moments of someone's life, they have their beloved family members, their children, their parents, their siblings, whoever is alive, they often are present at that moment. In the last moments of someone's life, the angels of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are also present, ready to take the soul of that individual. But at the same time, there is also Shaitan himself, Iblis, who is also present in the last moments of the life of the believer. Think about that for a second. One lesson that every single individual, believer or non-believer, or undoubtedly the believers, can take from Shaitan is, my friend, Shaitan never gives up. We could pray and we could worship and we could do everything during the course of our dunya to be subservient and in a state of submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but Shaitan never gives up, even in those last moments. He comes and says, hey, this merciful God that you were taught all about by that sheikh that one day, where is he now? Why is this moment so painful? Because we're told in the last moments of someone's life are the most trying, they're the most difficult, they're the most physically painful, they're the most mentally painful, they're the most spiritually painful. Because no matter how much belief that we have, many of us, or I speak of myself before anyone else, we still have various attachments to this dunya. And so the Shaitan will come and say, hey, how about this? I will make a transaction with you. You follow me, and I will give you a couple of more days of dunya. I'll give you one more year. I'll give you another year. I'll give you another month. I'll give you another decade. Of course, all of his claims are false, but at the end of the day, he's going to throw the kitchen sink at us in that given moment because he never, ever gives up. But the big question that many believers ask is, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, out of his kindness and out of his love and out of his mercy, why is it that those last moments are the most trying and the most difficult? It's a good question, right? Why is it that we can dedicate ourselves 70, 80, 90, 100, 120, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all a really long life, in devotion to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in prayers, in recitation of Quran, in adhkar, in majlis for Ahlul Bayt, alayhim as-salam, and then in those last moments, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still allows for the Shaitan to be present and makes those moments so difficult and so trying. Now hear me out. There are two important factors. If we're going to take one thing from this conversation, let it be these two really important points. The first factor which contributes to an individual having the Shaitan present and perhaps changing their mind in those final moments, ideally, like we said, it's a moment of transition. Why? Because someone who is a believer can become a non-believer in those most formative moments of their life. The first factor is that many a times, my friends, our faith isn't as we say. Many times we claim that our belief is really strong and we have certainty, but that certainty often wavers and goes through various valleys and peaks. For some individuals, no matter what they go through during the course of this life, they have firm belief and conviction in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for others, when things are going well, they're good with God. And when things aren't going so well, they say, oh Allah, where are you right now? Why did you do that to me? Why are you putting me through this trial and tribulation? Why me? When we see ourselves during the course of posing such questions, at the end of the day, the most important thing for us to actualize and contemplate upon is whether or not our faith is really as tight, is really as certain, is really as embedded within this heart as we say that it is. I'm going to recommend a really important book to you all. It's called A Grief Observed by C.S. Lewis. Many of you might be familiar with C.S. Lewis, this famous English writer. He writes this incredibly important and beautiful book. It's really, really simple. You can read it probably within the course of a week. C.S. Lewis was a Christian theologian, famous writer, and he writes a series of essays after the death of his wife, whose name was Helen. After his wife dies, he goes through so much depression and sadness and anxiety. And he begins to question God and ask God, oh God, why did you take my wife from me after I was looking for a wife who was as devoted and as loved as she was to me? She unfortunately had a terminal illness and passed away within a couple of years. And he begins to ask these questions. He was a theologian, he was a preacher, he would teach others about God. And in this series of essays, he talks about the emotion that he goes through day after day. And in that, he has this beautiful line. He states that I thought that my faith was as strong as a brick castle. But I realized soon after the death of my wife that my faith was as strong as a stack of cards. All God had to do was blow on it. Sometimes when things are going well, everything is simple. But thereafter, we realize, wait a minute, it's not nearly as strong as I claim. And he writes these series of essays concluding that if he had not gone through that experience, he would have not had the opportunity to reevaluate his faith, and is thankful in some capacity for the death of his wife or having to go through this tribulation, because it gave him the opportunity to strengthen his own belief. Factor number one, my friends, is that many a times we think that our faith is much stronger than it actually is, but every so often we should reconcile for ourselves and test ourselves to determine whether or not we truly have a sense of conviction between us and Rabbil Alameen. This is number one. The second reason why the shaitan may have an opportunity to influence and change our fortunes in those final moments during the course of this dunya, my friends, is because of the smallest of deeds and the smallest of interactions in this dunya. Someone might have strong belief, someone might have strong conviction. They undoubtedly believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They undoubtedly fulfill all of their prayers. They fast during the holy month of Ramadan. They believe in Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. They give in charity, so on and so forth. But amongst the biggest deeds that can lead us to ruin, even if it might be in the smallest of ways, is to break our familial relations. We see within our ahadith and within our traditions the importance of silatul arham, of keeping good familial ties. I know, my friend, it's hard. I know it's difficult. I know it's not easy. Sometimes it's incredibly challenging. But once in a while, to send a text message, to make a phone call, to say something nice, send Eid Mubarak, send a happy birthday. Birthdays are not haram all the time. Don't worry, it's okay. Doing something small, allowing to build that relationship, even the smallest way, really helps facilitate our growth and these final moments. And on the flip side, my friends, like we said last night, if we are in the least bit abusive toward those around us, our family members and our children, what benefit is the majlis of Al-Hussein alayhi salam if we can't act like Hussein when we go back to our homes? What benefit is it that we claim our love and adoration for the mercy unto the world's Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wasallam if we can't be merciful to our wives and to our children? What benefit is it? Imagine for a moment that when we transition from this world to the next and when we die, there is one person in this dunya who is actually happy that I'm no longer there. Hurts, huh? Imagine for a moment that we pass away and someone is actually relieved that I'm no longer there. It's a frightening thought to think about. But many a times, our family members are the first towards celebrating when we leave, because they say no longer are they oppressive to us. No longer do they restrict us. No longer do they talk to us this way. No longer do they strike us this way, hit us this way, speak to us this way. My friends, though our belief and our conviction might be strong, the smallest of deeds can truly create an obstacle for us in those final moments. And this leads me then to the third and the final point for this evening. How is it that we can be successful in these final moments? We are taught within our ahadith that there are various different stages or steps that we can take. I'm going to run through these super quickly, and I'm sorry for taking too much of your time this evening. The first one of these is to have strong conviction by consistently increasing our knowledge of the sciences of the Holy Quran and of Muhammadin wa ahli Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala. My friends, during these nights and days, we gather here night after night. I don't know about you, how many majalis that you've attended since the 1st of Muharram and how many you plan on attending in the next couple of weeks as well. There's so much knowledge, so much opportunity. A lot of times we come here ritualistically, which is also important and undoubtedly serves as an incredibly important blessing. No doubt about that. But where we can take one thing every day, and I remind myself before anyone else, where we can take one thing in terms of benefit and practice that during the course of our lives, one of these ahadith, one of these ayat of the Holy Quran, and implementing it during the course of our lives, we have such an incredible opportunity to learn and to grow during the course of these days. So let's make sure that we stay committed to the process, and beyond these days, recite the ayat of the Quran and reflect upon them. Recite the ahadith of Ahlul Bayt. Recite, open up the book of Kitab al-Kafi, read the du'as of Sahifat al-Sajjadiyya. We have an incredible legacy. Let us increase our knowledge individually and communally to get to where it is that we need to be. This is number one. A second step to making sure that we don't fail in these final moments as taught to us within our hadith is to make sure that we don't cling on too much to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning to be in a state between hope and fear of God's mercy and of God's wrath. لا يكون مؤمن مؤمنا حتى يكون خائفا رجاء. That a believer is not a believer until they are hopeful in God's mercy, but fearful in His wrath. That we're always between these two stages. When we commit a sin, remember God's accountability. But at the same time, when we seek forgiveness, also believe that God will forgive you. And when we have conviction that God has forgiven us, question your own sincerity of whether or not you were sincere when you sought forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Always play this game within your mind, within our minds, so that we're able to commit ourselves toward consistent growth during the course of this process. Number three, as we're taught within our traditions, the small things. The small things like prayers on time. We have specific hadith that tell us that at those moments of al-ihtidar, of adila, when that shaitan tries to shift our intentionality in those final moments, amongst the things which are going to be most helpful is prayers on time, is giving in charity, and of keeping good familial relations. These three small things that we can commit to during the course of our dunya. And the fourth, undoubtedly, is to show and to demonstrate intense love for these personalities that we come together for. We said before that there are various different factions which are present in the final moments of the believer. There are the family members, there are the angels, there are shaitan, and we have ahadith of Ahlul Bayt that have reached the level of tawatur in accordance with our tradition that tell us, in addition to those factions, there will also be the presence of Muhammad and Ali, peace and blessings be upon them. Allahumma salli. And that they will stand, for the believer at least, and support us through that journey, reminding us to recite the shahadatain, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, wahdahu la sharika lah, wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasulah. And to bear witness and testify in our final moments that these are the awliya of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they are the means to transition us from dunya to akhirah. And the way that we are able to have their support, in addition to committing to all of these others, my friends, is also to gather in gatherings like these ones. To show this intense love that we do day after day. We spend out of our time and of our wealth. We commit our children to their love and to devoting themselves to them as well. We try our best. And at the end of the day, undoubtedly, this blessing is so beautiful. And it will manifest itself in so many a way. And know, my friends, that these majalis that we come together in honor of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein alayhi salam has undoubtedly been sanctified and taught to us by the greatest of his creations. Which is why every opportunity that Ali Zayn al-Abidin had to reminding others about the tragedy of al-Hussein, he did just that. He did exactly that. On those days, they would enter into Ali Zayn al-Abidin and they would see him so overwhelmed with grief. And they would state, Yabna Rasulullah, why do we see you grieving in this way? He says that in front of me I have food, and in front of me I have drink. But the son of the daughter of the Messenger of God, he died thirsty and he died hungry. And he would recite this 3 times. The son of the Messenger of God, the son of the daughter of the Messenger of God died hungry and he died thirsty. He would walk in the marketplace and he would see that butcher preparing to slaughter the sheep. And he would say, "Oh man, did you serve water to the sheep before you slaughter it?" At this moment, he says, "Oh grandson of the Messenger of God, and how could I not give water before I slaughter this animal?" To which Zayn al-Abidin would turn toward Karbala. He says, "Oh my father, Aba Abdullah, did you hear? Did you hear what this man said? That before they slaughter the sheep, they give it food and they give it drink, but they left you alone, thirsty and hungry, alone on the plains of Karbala. Oh Aba Abdullah." Every single moment that Ali Zayn al-Abidin had toward recollecting the tragedy of Al-Hussein alayhi salam, he did just that. And last night, my friends, we talked about those moments when Zainab alayhi salam, she enters into the court of Yazid bin Muawiyah. But I want to rewind just one moment, because when we talk about the difficulties and the trials and the tribulations of Zainab alayhi salam, we reflect upon various different moments. Some say the most painful moment that she had to endure was on the night of the 11th of Muharram. Others will say it was on the 1st of Safar when she enters into Damascus. Others would say that when she enters into Kufa in front of Ubaidullah ibn Ziyad. And I don't know what is the most difficult moment in the life of Zainab alayhi salam, but I know that in these nights of Muharram and Safar, if you perform the ziyarah of Abi Abdullah al-Hussein and you walk by that hill known as Til al-Zainabi, they have a massive flag and it states, "As-salamu ala Jabal al-Sabir." Peace be upon you, O mountain of patience. And one time I was wondering exactly what this means, and I remembered perhaps that they were referring to this incredibly trying moment for Zainab alayhi salam. As the poet states, that when Shimr runs out of the tent, Zainab, she runs up the hill. And when Shimr reaches the climax, which is on the chest of Aba Abdullah, Zainab alayhi salam, she reaches the climax, which is the top of that hill. And when Shimr removes the dagger, ready to sever the head of Aba Abdullah, Zainab, for a moment, perhaps in this most difficult moment, she says, "Let me go and defend my brother Aba Abdullah." And as she began to make strides toward the middle of the battlefield, she had to pause. Why? Because behind her she heard children calling out, "Alatash, oh our Aunt Zainab, are you going to bring us water? Because we are dying from the thirst of Karbala." And at this moment, Zainab alayhi salam froze. She looks behind her and she sees Sukaina, and she looks in front of her and she sees Aba Abdullah. She looks behind her and she hears the cries, and at that moment she sees the head of Hussein raised on his feet. على لعنة الله على القوم الظالمين إنا لله وإنا إليه راجعون. With grief in our heart, with tears in our eyes, we raise our hands to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us a life that resembles the life of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, and a death that resembles the death of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make our transition from this dunya to the akhirah in the company of Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad, bi Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq. Walhamdulillah rabbil alameen. Wa sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa alihi at-tahirin ma'atam Hussein. Ya Hussein.